There are so many topics actually that Bridget could share with us. I think this one is so amazing to me. I was like, yes. But before we turn things over to Bridget, do you want to do announcements and then I'll pray, or do you want me to do the prayer first?
I'll do an announcement.
Here.
I just want to welcome everybody.
Mike.
Oh, yes.
Come, Mike.
Yes, I know. Do a backflip here. Okay. Hi, everybody. It's so nice to see you. And those who are going to be watching this later on, welcome. We have some new guests here today from Rossmore. Sherry's been here for longer than I have, I think, at Temple. So it's wonderful to see you. And then there's a visiting lady, Marion, who's just here for a little while. She's come to join us. So welcome, everybody. And I just want to let you know that next month, this is always the third Wednesday of the month, we are going to have another member of our temple, Lauren Schub. She also lives in Rossmore, and she has going to tell us all about life as an entertainer, performer. She's been a singer, an actress, and she's going to share some pictures from Hollywood, I think, and she has a CD. Anyway, so it'll be fun. And then in January, put on your calendar the 15th of January, Julie Redberg, who's presented before. She's has a lot of experience with people as we get older, and she's doing memory loss and aging, what's normal, what's not. So I think that should be fun. So don't forget to put that for January 15th. And Joy's going to mention another group that's starting as well.
Hi, everybody. I'm Joy Plummer. I am the Assistant Director of Engagement here at Temple Isaiah. So if I haven't met you, hello, and I hope to meet you soon. Two things. First of all, we are not going to have a Wise Ones Out and About event in December. It's a little busy, and it's just too busy. So we will take a pause in December to do all of the other things that we do, and then we will reconvene in January, and I don't recall if we have anything scheduled for then, but watch your Ruach and Shavua Tov for announcements. The second thing I wanted to mention is that we have a support group starting up that will be facilitated by Guy Goober, who you probably see here sometimes with his partner Carolyn Sladnick. He has been blind since birth, or with very low vision, and he is starting a support group here for people with vision loss and low vision. So if you're interested, please see your Shavua Tov or your Ruach. There is an announcement in there, and with my email address as the contact. So please contact me and let me know if you're interested. We are also looking for co-facilitators for this group. So if you're interested in that, also please let me know. So, thank you. Enjoy Bridget's talk.
And if you know of anybody who could benefit from that group, pass the word along. There are services on Friday night, as always. And even during Thanksgiving week, there will be services on Friday night. And if you've ever wondered what services are like without a rabbi, come, because Cantor Korn is going to be the solo leader on the Friday night after Thanksgiving doing services here. And it'll be a treat, because I have a feeling it'll be even more musical than normal. Anybody? Anything else that I should throw out? Okay. We are working on Circles 5.5. It'll launch in January. I think we're up to like 11 or 12 groups. So keep your eye peeled. Are you okay? Do you need some water? Okay. So I was very excited to find this prayer by Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. I've always wanted to say that. Who writes a prayer for nature. Grant me the ability to be alone. May it be my custom to go outdoors each day among the trees and grass, among all growing things, and there may I be alone and enter into prayer to talk with the one whom I belong. May I express there everything in my heart, and may all the foliage of the trees, all the grasses, trees, and plants awake at my coming, to send the powers of their life into the words of my prayers, so that my prayer and speech are made whole through life and spirit of all growing things which are made as one by their transcendent source. May I then pour out the words of my heart before your presence like water and lift up my hands to you in worship on my behalf and that of my children. And there is a prayer that we say for flowers and herbs, which is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei isvei bisamim. We praise you, eternal God, sovereign of the universe, who creates fragrant flowers and herbs. And I was like, that's kind of perfect for Bridget. So with that blessing, I'm going to let you sort of tell us who you are. Some of us already know you anyway. I'm going to welcome Bridget and thank Jan for being the most amazing partner for 9 years ever.
And Julie, who always is here and makes the most wonderful treats for us. Thank you.
She does. She does. Thank you both. Thank you both. How's the sound in the back? Okay? All right, great. Okay. Terrific. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited and happy to share about herbalism, Ashkenazi herbalism, Sephardic herbalism. Before I do, I'll just jump in a little bit. Some of you know me, some of you don't. I'm a longtime temple member, if you consider 20 years a long time. And in my role here, in my capacity, I work with all of our education programs. So I'm the Director of Student Support, and that means I support children 18 months old in the preschool through 18 years old in our high school to make sure that any child with a learning difference or a medical need or an emotional need is able to have their needs met and access their education. And that looks a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's modifying a text for them. It's helping with the B'nai Mitzvah process. And sometimes they just need a break after school when they come from JQuest and they need a snack. So we just take a little break together. I have a couple of programs I want to highlight real quick just so I can plug them. I initiated an affinity group a couple of years ago for parents and caregivers of children with diverse learning needs. I have a few dates here for this year. We've been doing that for a couple of years. I have guest speakers come. Sometimes we just kind of need to sit together and kvetch or just have community, and sometimes the guest speakers are helping with things like an IEP process or eating challenges for children. So the upcoming dates are here for that. Please share that out widely if you know of people who have children, grandchildren, nephews. And then I have another of other resources here for parents and families with QR codes and a QR code to email me as well. So if you find any of that information useful, please take that. This year we started something new with our wonderful Avodonics. Our Avodah team come on Tuesday afternoon, Wednesday afternoon, and Sunday and give their time to help support all our students. For many years we had a checkbox on their application that said, if you want extra training to work with children with different needs, let us know. And every year about 5 of these wonderful young people checked the box, but we didn't have any training program for them or anything, so it's just sort of landed flat. So when I started, I said, I think we need to change that. So this year, we let them know about the training program and the curriculum that I developed, and typically we have 5 people sign up. This year we had 13. So they really are invested. So these are beautiful 8th grade through 12th grade. They're very committed, and I'm hoping to grow that program. But anyway, that's a little bit about some of what I've been doing here. I do professional development for all our teachers, and I do parent education as well. And in my free time, I'm a doctoral student at the Mazar School, American Jewish University. So busy, busy. But what we're here to talk about today is Ashkenazi and Sephardi herbalism. I came to herbalism after some serious medical challenges. After one of my surgical procedures, the hospital had clipped on, I was in the recovery room, I'm like, what is that smell? They clipped on a little lavender mint aromatherapy, which I thought was odd, but it was quite nice. And so I started thinking about, well, if there's some legitimacy to this, the hospital's doing it, maybe I should explore it. And there's a woman named Anna Bushman, East Bay Herbals, who does free classes, and she did some through the library during COVID, and I connected with her, and I really liked her teaching style, and so I did a 9-month apprenticeship program with her. So that's sort of how I came to herbalism, and then I found this book, and some of you know this book, Ashkenazi Herbalism, and it's just a treasure. So it is a treasure, but this much of the book is about the history, and this much about of the book is materia medica, which is the plant information. So there's just a very faint trail for us to follow, and so that's why it's not a dense book. There are a few other authors. I'll have this and some other books out if anyone's interested in looking at it, but that's the origin of this content for today's talk. So I practice community herbalism. I only practice at Temple. Community herbalists donate their time and services, so it's a way for me to give back to this community, and I do that in a variety of ways. I've donated to the gala to do herb walks, custom blended teas, and then I'm happy to always do a talk like this or an herb walk. We have a lot of really interesting herbs right here on our campus, and so if there are opportunities or anyone's interested in reaching out to me to talk to me about any of that, I'll share my email at the end. All right, so most of the talk today will be about sort of 3 very different times in Jewish history. I'm going to start with the Torah and some of the biblical herbal references in the Talmud. Then we're going to jump really far ahead to Pale of the Settlement, where you wouldn't necessarily think there was a lot of herbalism, but a lot of shtetl medicine was happening with herbs at that time. And then we're going to take another leap to modern practice. And I broke the talk up this way because a lot of what I learned that was new and fascinating kind of fell into these 3 buckets. So that's how we will move along today. So the biblical origins of Jewish herbal practices, there aren't actually a lot of medicinal plants that are described. I have some handouts here that are biblical references, and there are quite a few, but they're more about ritual use. So one of those is garlic, which is pictured here on the left, and that actually, garlic is something that overlaps, if you had a Venn diagram, between herbal practice, nutrition, it's a nutritive plant, and protection. In the center is hyssop, which shows up a lot. There are many, many biblical references to hyssop. And nettle is on the far right. So garlic was prevalent everywhere. It grew easily. It's high in manganese, vitamin B, vitamin C, psyllium, and fiber. And I actually found somewhere on campus here this Hamsa, which has at the bottom of it a garlic clove, which I thought was really interesting. So depending on the strand of Jewish practice and kind of where people are, the garlic shows up in different ways. Most of what we know and why this book is so thin is it's a faint trail. So we have to kind of cobble together some understanding. So there were oral traditions around herbalism. There was apprentice-style learning. Much of what was practiced in the Pale was isolated, and there's been a loss of the history because a lot of it wasn't codified. And of course, Holocaust, and the translations are difficult. So plant identification, if you're gardeners or botanists, you know, it's really challenging. A lot of things look alike, and there's a lot of different ways to describe plants and herbs and their uses, and they don't always translate. So that's made it hard. So I'm really curious, I'd like to just put it out to the group what plants or herbs or spices you have memory of using in your family or a tradition. Joy?
Actually, I still use this remedy. If I have a toothache, or if any of my kids have a toothache, we use clove bud oil. And my mom also, if my mom had something wrong with her teeth, my grandmother would give her a clove to
A clove, yeah, yeah, yeah. It has numbing properties, so I've heard that before about, yeah.
It totally works.
That's so cool, yes. Oh. Uh-huh. Okay.
And also another memory I have, they had a lot of tea and mint.
Oh, yeah.
Nana. We call it nana.
Nana ferment.
Yeah, so this was the two main.
Wow, so I don't know if everybody heard that, but that would be a Sephardic tradition then to have a garlic under. Okay, thank you so much. Under when a baby was born, and mint tea.
Mm-hmm. That was always in my house, and when people are coming to visit, family, everybody's drinking tea and mint. So
Mint.
I have these two things that I always.
Nice.
Yeah, there was another thing. I don't know if onion is one. So onion was about like if somebody injured and they had like a bad knee or something, you take the onion and you put it at the door, shut the door, and you don't cut it because you want it like to
Oh, the juice.
the juice. Put it on the yeah. So that was like my brothers always with basketball.
This idea of garlic, also there's this idea of evil eye, and that there were evil, it was protective, and that disease and other maladies were caused by evil spirits. So there's a lot of mysticism. Yeah, and the onion, and they're in the same family. So did you want to?
Yeah, we used mustard plasters
Oh, yeah.
for the heat to break up bronchitis.
Oh, yeah, mustard plaster, that'll do it. It will.
So I remember when my brother was little, I mean, this goes back 80 years, we were afraid of polio. And so my mother made him wear a necklace of garlic.
Oh, yeah. So here's the garlic again showing up for us. So that's so interesting. Anyone else want to share?
My mother was from Hungary, and growing up as a kiddo here in the States, when we got a flu or a bad cold, we would use, she would make a big pot with chamomile flowers.
Oh.
And then put a bunch of towels over our heads, and it was like a miserable experience, but but it would really be kind of a wonderful healing thing at the same time.
Nice. And there's one more person up front here.
I come from Chile, and in Chile, everybody uses lots of herbs. At the entrance of every hospital and church, there's a kiosk of an herbalist with all kind of herbs selling at there.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. So, our sort of view of herbs changes over time, and sometimes we just think of it as something restorative, as like a tea, or we put things into our soup that we know are good, makes the soup delicious, they're good for us. Sometimes it's ritual, it shows up on our Seder plate. And so one person I spoke with said that in their spice box, she's a Sephardi, she's Sephardic origin. She said they put fresh herbs. They put mint and lemon verbena. And so one of the things I would just encourage us to try is something other than cloves or cinnamon. So there are a lot of traditions around clove and cinnamon, but also cardamom, myrtle, which we have here on campus. There's some here. It's lovely, it's fragrant. We have a different variety that we use for the lulav, and that myrtle can be reused after the holiday. Myrrh, star anise, orange peel, etrog. So I take the etrog from here after the holiday and I take and dry the peels because you can't really use them for anything and I hate to throw them away. So I dry the peels. I also make a liqueur with them, but I brought a little bit here if anybody wants to see it or smell it. Also, other traditions use mint and rose and jasmine, so you might try that in your spice box. So I did not hand out the handouts, so I have those, but I think it's a little distracting. So I'll just refer to, you'll see this in the handout. So there's sort of 3 strands of herbalism in biblical references. So pictured here on the right is using the hyssop, which is actually the requirement. It's I don't think it's a commandment, but that's what's required to spread the lamb's blood on the door frame. So the hyssop shows up a lot, but more as a ritual object. It was used for purification, hyssop baths, hyssop foot baths. It has a great official name, Hyssopus officinalis. I mean, that's just fun to say. So this is an edible member of the mint family. It's rich in flavonoids, which is a flavorful compound, and acts as an antioxidant. So they weren't wrong about the properties. Again, garlic shows up a lot. Revered figures such as Rambam practiced herbal treatments, and of course the survival of Jews. In the siege of Jerusalem, there was foraging for mallow. Mallow's a demulcent. It's kind of got a slimy texture, so it's kind of a nutritious and substantial herb. So when we look at the scriptures, there are 70 herbs mentioned, and only a few are mentioned in a medicinal way. Most are for ritual, some are for perfume or cosmetics, but most of them are mentioned for the incense offering in the temple, which I thought was surprising, and I had never heard of this. So this is where we're going. So the Ketoret was a sacred incense used in the temple, and it had 11 materials, including herbs. I thought that was interesting, 11 herbs and spices. Maybe just that's me. But the herbs were listed in rabbinic texts that they were these ingredients with specific measurements, but the ingredients themselves were a closely guarded secret for a long time. So some of this is guessing, but it's an educated guess. So there was a commandment to blend this incense, and there was one family responsible for it, and they were responsible for compounding it in the exact formulation and for not sharing that information and not using it for personal use. So the way that they used this is that there were 368 portions, one for each day of the year, and half in the morning, half in the evening, and then 3 extra portions rendered for Yom Kippur. It was later used for protection from plagues, but in numbers that's described, but it was really exclusively for the incense offering. So this was very serious business. No one was to take any of this and use it for personal use or share the blending. It was thought if the recipe or the formulation was shared, it could be used by someone who wasn't religious enough, wasn't of value enough they could possibly taint the formula or misuse it. The penalty was death for using it outside of the prescribed use. And then Rabbi Natan said that the spices, that it was important to chant the blessing to make it fine out loud while grinding because the sound of the voice was beneficial to the spices. So this secrecy and sort of whispering and chanting, and this shows up over and over again, which I think is a part of the mysticism piece. So this is a bird's eye view of the temple, and down in the bottom here is the chamber where the incense was prepared. That's the southern wall, it's the inner courtyard. And of the 11 ingredients, one ingredient was added to make the smoke rise in a straight column, which made it really different from all the other kind of smoke that people would have seen from a burnt offering or a fire, which would blow in the wind. And so this was a really impressive tower or column of smoke. And that ingredient has been debated, but I'm going to give you, I think we have a good idea. So here's the secret formula. It's not a secret anymore, so I can share it. So again, there's a little bit of uncertainty around sort of the translation. So tsori, we believe, might have been the propolis that bees used, bee balm or bee glue to seal up it's a little hard to see. So these are kind of the bees here, and here's the glue. And it's possible that it was a plant that has since been extinct called balm of Gilead, if anyone's heard of that. There's this expression, there's no balm in Gilead, and it's sort of a cure-all, so we're not sure. And then the mollusk is thought to have been ground, and that actually had a number of purposes. It also changed colors. It could be used to dye things blue. So again, we're not sure about the translation, but if it was ground properly, it did produce an aromatic substance. Spikenard on the left is a plant that produced a fragrant oil. We think it also could have been a kind of balsam. Myrrh, a fragrant gum resin from that plant. A lot of these plants are in danger now, climate change and just environmental effects. So cassia is interesting. It's a kind of cinnamon. The recipe or formula calls for a number of different kinds of cinnamon. I brought three or four that you can look at and smell if you'd like. The saffron was also an ingredient. Frankincense. The top picture here is frankincense as it shows up as a resin, and that's the tree or plant that it comes from. And then cinnamon. Again, there were a lot of different kinds of cinnamon, so it's a little unclear which blend. The costus had aromatic roots, so to access those, the plant had to be killed. So in harvesting these ingredients, that would be something that would damage that plant. Kelbana in the center here, the interesting name for that, the Latin name is Liquidambar orientalis, and that had a really strong resinous odor. So here on the right is Leptidinea pyrotechnia, and you might have guessed from that second part, pyrotechnia, that there's something flammable. It suggests something flammable. This is the plant we believe was added to have the smoke rise in a straight column. It contains nitric acid. It's known for its flammability, and so we believe that's what it was. But again, not certain. You can buy temple incense, turns out, online. So these are available. They mostly have the ingredients. The one on the left shows clove, which isn't, we don't know for sure, but that was possibly not added. But I'm sure that one smells quite nice. In addition to the temple incense, there's a formulation of anointing oil for the Kohanim. That included olive oil, myrrh, cinnamon, and other spices described in the Torah. I brought some of these ingredients, Gesundheit, Gesundleben, along. I brought some of these ingredients. They're double bagged because they're strong, and I know some people have sensitivities. If you'd like to smell them, they're available here. These are not the highest quality, and so they're not quite as strong, but you get a sense of what they would have smelled like. You can only imagine all of them together. It'd be quite strong. So following this faint trail in history, the Sumerians created clay tablets. They had hundreds of medicinal plants. There are also ancient Egyptian text records like the Papyrus Ebers. They had 800 plant and herbal preparations and uses. So when we see this, we think that there's a hint here about the part of the plant that was usable, and or possibly the part of the body that the plant could have been used for. So I'm taking a guess here. I'm looking at the leaves. I'm thinking this might have been good for a headache or a sleep remedy. I'm also thinking that the body very much looks like a root. It doesn't look like branches. So I would think, if we were taking a guess, that's what they're trying to communicate to us. This is a detail from the Sarajevo Haggadah. It's a Sephardic Haggadah. And here the maror is represented as an artichoke. I brought a book this is an illuminated text. We have a few books in our library here, and I brought a couple up that show different manuscripts and include a lot of different herbal representations. This particular Haggadah is the oldest Sephardic Haggadah. It's believed to have been created in Barcelona by Spanish Jews around 1350, and some of its pages are stained with wine, so we think it was used for seders. All right, we're going to take a huge leap forward now. Huge, to the Pale of Settlement, and this is a really important focus for herbalism. So this is the westernmost region of the Russian Empire. It lasted for 124 years, and it was part of what is today Belarus, Lithuania, Moldova, Ukraine, Poland, Latvia, and Russia, and it was where we were relegated to live and could not leave unless we were artisans. So if you were an artisan, you were allowed to leave. You had some privileges. The artisans that I am most interested in, and we're going to talk a little bit about today, were distillers and brewers, and how that relates to herbalism and why that was important. So this is a map. This one's from 1825, and it shows sort of to the north here the Baltic Sea, and then down here to the south to the Caspian. So what we know about herbalism from this period primarily comes from a person named Shlomi Rappaport. He was a playwright, a researcher, a folklorist, and a political activist, and he changed his name to S. Ansky, and much of what he learned has been locked away in let me just look quickly and see, the State Ethnographic Museum in St. Petersburg. And some of it only came to light in the 1990s. So this faint trail is emerging a little bit more for us, but it's taken some time. So what he did was, from 1912 to 1914, he did an ethnographic survey in the Pale, and he had a 2,000 question survey, so short survey. He collected thousands of photographs, folk stories, folk medicine recipes, songs, and tales. and he's said to have based his famous play, The Dybbuk, on this research. Interesting side note, nothing to do about herbalism, but historian Nathan Deutsch thinks that that story was actually based on a maiden of Ludmir, who was Hannah Rachel Vermacher. And she was apparently the only female rabbi in Hasidic history. And they thought she was possessed because she acted in a masculine way, probably by teaching, who knows. So he took all of this, he compiled it, and a lot of what we know about the traditions at that time came from that. This map is not from the same period, but I just want to highlight that I'm using this to illustrate. Down here in the bottom are the Spice Islands, and this turquoise line, of course, sort of follows the spice route. And then the Silk Road is here in gold, and all these little red tributaries are connector routes. So because Jews were involved heavily in the spice trade, for centuries, Jews were known as spice traders, herbalists, and healers. We had access to all of this wisdom and material, and played a significant role in the trade, the spice trade, as early as biblical times of Solomon. We've maintained that allyship throughout the diaspora as well. So one famous herbalist wrote a manuscript called Cool Vineyard. It was published in 1672, and the main part of the transcript was about overseas and Russian potions. And that word shows up a lot in the Pale and the research I did, and wood and herbs. So the Pale, in what is now Ukraine primarily, folk medicine was used. They used 1,000 species of plants. 80% of those grew wild, and then some were harvested or were planted. So I think some of the things like the nettle and other sort of, I would say, dandelion, the things that we consider weeds that really had a lot of nutritional value, were really important to our survival, not just in this area, but also throughout the world. Wherever we went, we had nettle, we had garlic, we had dandelion. Nobody cared about dandelion, nobody wanted it. It's not a pretty smelling flower, but it's really a very important plant, very important herb. I did bring some nettle tea, and some nettle shortbread for tasting later if anybody would like to taste it. I think nettle just showed up for us, so I like to promote it. The tea is bitter. I'm just going to tell you right now, it's bitter. I put honey out there. I didn't sweeten because I don't know how people like their things sweet, and it's all subjective. But it's delicious, but it is bitter. All right, moving on. So in the Pale, we had Feldshers, who got their training from barbers. And barbers mostly were field surgeons, and they mostly concerned themselves with amputations. They were not doing preventative care much. That was just the nature of their practice. But the Feldshers, or folk healers, grew from that tradition. They did learn then later, they kind of melded that surgical, it's rough surgical, right? It's not finessed, with therapeutic advice, recipes, magical incantations, Kabbalistic methods, and practical techniques. Then midwives were also very important during this time, and they were revered by families. So midwives were, children would follow them. They were very appreciative as a community, and they provided for them. But being relegated to the Pale, we did not have a lot of outside interaction unless you were a skilled trade. So these traditions grew from there. Eventually, midwives were permitted formal education, but that came later after the revolution in 1917. At that time, they were expected to know all the current medical practices and medicinal plant remedies. So there was this recognition that this was important. And then murmurers, does anybody know a little history of the murmurers or professional mourners? So these were women who recited prayers and blessings, and they sometimes were also midwives. So Greek herbals found their way through the monasteries. The first pharmacy or potion store was opened in Russia, in the capital of Kiev, around 1000 CE by a Greek monk. So there was some Greek influence there, which is interesting. So some of the Sephardic traditions there. This is fascinating. According to the chronicles of the old city of Novgorod, Russian herbalists were called nologists, and they were able to cure infected wounds with banya mold. So I had to go looking, what is banya? Banya is a sauna. So somehow, I don't know, somebody bumped into the back of the wall of the mold in the sauna and was like, oh, my wound is healed. I don't know how they came across this, but somehow they discovered this. This isn't really out of the realm of in the realm of really all that unusual, because things like spider webs were used to help close wounds. So it was just a fascinating sort of overlap. But this was the 13th century. They discovered the properties of mold. They used it to poultice wounds, and this predates the development of penicillin by 7 centuries. So here are some of the Sephardic herbs that show up. Asafoetida was a spice used as a digestive aid. I found in the research there were a lot of digestive aids. I guess the meat was probably not all that good. I don't know. It was also a condiment, and it was pickled. Pickling and drying and fermenting these things made them easy to travel with, easy to access later. These plants look a lot alike, and I think I want to highlight things look similar, and like this to me looks a little bit like fennel. It is related to wild carrot or parsley, but you do have to be careful. And also, full disclaimer, nothing here is medical advice, so please consult your physician before taking any herbs. But this is an interesting sort of these two plants looking so similar. Oregano shows up, but there's a specific kind, this ironwort. And wort is a very common ending for a lot of herbal plants. I suspect that's where this idea of witches having warts came from. I don't know for sure, but maybe. And this is a very nutritive plant as well. And parsley, it's delicious, but it's also an important herb that shows up, and that grows easily as well. Rosemary, I have a little bit of that here on display. We have a lot of that on our campus, also delicious. Mint and chamomile. So I'm hearing a lot of the chamomile and the mint and things used that you've shared. So here's a depiction of murmurers. This is a more recent illustration, but these women would be part of a funeral procession. They were either called wailers or mourners, and they were an important part of the community rituals around mourning. And again, some of them were also midwives. This picture's from 1924, and this is mourners and professional mourners. So another interesting thing that came up that I'd never heard about in Judaism really is amulets and the use of amulets and this idea about protection from an evil eye. So there was this belief that illness was caused by evil eye or malicious spirits, and there were a lot of different kinds of amulets provided. So some of them were a little drawing or a scroll. Some of them were coins that were blessed by the rabbi and then melted into other objects. So I'll just share a few pictures of these. And in the biblical reference that I have copies for you, there was also this sort of relaxation around rules about kashrut if it was for healing, right? So what showed up was a lot of lard being used externally to prevent frostbite. So mixing it with horseradish or mustard, something hot, something spicy, and applying it to the body. And that was okay. So the strict rules were sort of set aside. This is an amulet with a really interesting plant border. I don't know what those plants are exactly, but I just think it's interesting that plants are showing up all the time in a lot of artwork in different ways. This is one of those Kiddush cups that I described where they took the coins that were melted down. The coins were for protection. And another one, this was a blessing for a family. So here's where we get to talk about our distillers, and I just want to do a time check. I think we're okay. So distillers, tavern keepers, and brewers were allowed to leave the Pale and to come back. So they exchanged knowledge and materials. They were a really important part of herbalism. They had a lot of knowledge. They produced digestive bitters. They produced beverages and topicals, and all of the alcohol that was used to tincture herbs. So there was a strong relationship between the herbalist and then the distiller. And a lot of the things taste bitter. When you add alcohol, it's maybe still bitter, but you don't mind. So one interesting thing I learned is that Helena Rubinstein was born in what's now Poland, and some of her recipes came from this area, this period. Her secret ingredient was lanolin from lamb's wool, which is really softens the skin, but it's really smelly. So rather than smelling like a farm animal, she used lavender, pine bark, and water lilies to scent her, to try to lessen the scent of the lanolin. So early drugstores showed up. Jewish pharmacists were not allowed to prescribe any medication or any herbal treatment. So what did we do? We refilled prescriptions. So we figured out a way like, okay, I can't fill that, but I can refill it for you. So we found a way. And also alongside in the pharmacies were remedies that the pharmacists developed themselves. So you might come in for X from your pharmacist or your doctor, but we have this lovely other thing that's delicious and maybe has alcohol, and so people had a choice. This is a picture of a spice shop. On the left is the spice shop, on the right is a restaurant. This is from 1924. On the wall here is a mortar and pestle. This family owned this spice shop for quite a long time. This one, I just wanted to go back to this. This was called Feldischer's Drugstore. This was 1910. So moving on. So here's sort of the inside view of what the pharmacy would have looked like. So plant material, herbs, leaves, roots would have been dried for the most part and stored on the shelves. And then you had quite large mortar and pestle here. And the mortar and pestles were probably specific for each herb. They probably didn't blend. They might have had one for blending, but they probably had one for each kind of herb or herb family. You wouldn't want your mint with your garlic, for example. Here are just some of the other equipment: bottling jars, drawers. Here, interestingly, on this sort of bench are like coffee grinders. So this would have been grinding for distillation or extraction for woody parts, bark, roots, more heavy berries that were dried. And then up on the top shelf, I thought this was an interesting parallel. There are these extraction tools for elixir, and that also shows up. It's not all that different looking. This is a physician preparing an elixir. This is from a folio, an Arabic translation, 1st century Greek Materia Medica. And here he's just sitting, waiting for the drip, drip, drip. It was tedious. It took a long time to extract. I'm guessing one of those trees is probably olive, because olive oil would have been used also in the production of the herbs. Okay, so what did we do? What did we use, and how did we use it in the time we have left? I found it surprising that we used cupping. Was called bunkus. So cupping is where, you know, you put the glass jar on the back or wherever and you heat it, and then, so that was very common. Plasters were very common with oil or egg yolk, with mustard. You would always want to put a layer between the skin, some cotton or some material between the skin and the mustard or the horseradish. The poultice was a whole herb, usually mashed up into a paste, applied on the treatment area. The simplest form is a spit poultice. You can just find a plant that you know is okay while you're walking. If you have a bug bite or something, chew it up and put it on the skin. Plantain was applied in this way. Yarrow was used for staunching bleeding. And what else did we use? So tea was very common. Salves, tinctures, soups or broths were great because they drew out a lot of the nutrients, and they were flavorful. Foot baths, as it turned out, were a huge thing. They were really common. It was common in the Bible. It was common in the Pale. That showed up a lot. Treatments were things like general aches and pains. Dog bites were really common. I found that surprising also, but you can imagine, it's not like we have, you know, rabies shots and animal control. They did not have that. And then infections, all kinds of horrible infections, frostbite, parasites, all kinds of ailments. So pictured here is a tincture, foot bath, poultice. Sorry, that is not a poultice. That is, oh yeah, that is. And then I really love this picture. This is a samovar for serving tea, and it's got a string of bagels, and it's got a crown of garlic and chili. So a lot of intention in creating something lovely. There is a book I haven't been able to find, The Frog Under the Tongue. This talks a lot about the different folklore. Since the Second World War, 20 research institutions connected with medical and pharmaceutical institutes have conducted plant research in Ukraine. The Kharkiv Pharmaceutical Institute focuses on isolating glucosides and using them in new medicines. They play a leading role in this field in the world. In Ukraine, there are about 12,000 species of medicinal plants, and about half of the medical plant production for the USSR, at least in 1957, was from Ukraine, particularly Crimea. The Ukraine was sometimes referred to as the pharmacy to Russia. I would say the world, because they're working on new medicines now. Medicinal plants were mentioned a lot in Ukrainian folk songs, folk tales, and folklore conferred special status on men and women who knew how to use plants. I will quickly, we're done at 1, yes? 2-minute time check? Okay, so I'll quickly give you an update. What's happening now? We're gonna jump forward in time again and talk about what's happening now. Herbalism in Israel is thriving, and it's a growing form of alternative medicine. There's an organization called the Israeli Society of Plant Science, and there's an Israeli company called Al Alim, and they work with 200 medicinal herbs and do research. There's an international conference every year, and it's really largely because of the biodiversity there. Similarly, Ukraine has a really interesting climate, and so that's why they are able to grow a variety of herbs and plants. There's a QR code here. If anyone wants to see about some of the new or recent research, you could take out your phone and scan it. If you don't have time now, because we're going to be moving on from this slide, that's fine. I can share that with you later. Okay, I want to just touch on this. It's exciting. In September, there was an article about a 1,000-year-old seed for this tree, the balm of Gilead. Scientists have been able to grow this. They found it in a cave, in a Judean cave in the desert, and they believe it is the extinct tree that's mentioned in the Bible. This is very exciting. So they found it in the 1980s, and then it was in some locker, some cold storage somewhere. It took 10 years, they planted it 10 years ago, to get it from seed to flower, and they can now research it because it's flowered. They couldn't research it until it flowered because they didn't have every part of the plant. They believe it originally grew between 993 and 1200 CE, and they believe that this was the plant used biblically. So it was used for a lot of different conditions, so it was kind of a good for what ails you. On our campus, I know that we have to wrap up. It's 1 o'clock. I'm also happy to do an herb walk here on campus sometime. We have Jimson weed, which is a volunteer that just showed up in the parking lot. All parts of that are poisonous, but historically it was used as a sedative for probably surgical procedures. We have manzanita, we have loquat, we have the rosemary, the myrrh, myrtle rather, olives, grapes, we have all of those things here. We also have a lot of herbs in the children's garden. So the myrtle on our campus is the whole shrub under the windows at Ghana Lawn. So that's all myrtle. Every part of myrtle is edible. Unless you have allergies, so, this is small medicine, so it doesn't generally interfere with pharmaceuticals, but if you're taking something, please check with your physician. So myrtle hadass is good for skin and lungs. Here it is flowering. Here's the berry, new berry, ripe berry, dried berry, and the bark. I'm going to be harvesting some of the berry to dry it to make a tincture. And I will just say the materia medica in the book is extensive. These are the different properties of the plants. We just don't have time to go into all of them, but there they are. And then nettle, of course. So the ones that are bolded are the ones that show up a lot in our history, and some of them we have here on our campus. Some of the more unusual things too, like the water lily, I had not heard of until I heard the story about Helena Rubinstein. Here are some of the references. I can also share these out with you if you like. I have a couple that you can link to. The top link is to the Ashkenazi Herbalism book. The middle is to sort of a lot of this history around the Pale. It's dense. It includes everything that happened in the Pale as far as up until the date they finished the research. And then that last QR code is for more about the balm of Gilead. There's a lot of interesting information about these authors. They're local, so UC Berkeley folks. I don't think we have time for Q&A, so email me if you have a question. Sei gesund. And thank you very much. If you want to email me, that's the QR code. It's also up here on the handout. Please come up and smell anything you want to smell and check out and ask me any questions that you have as well. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Bridget, just before you leave, thank you so very much. I'm sort of blown away by all the information you've given us. Aren't you, everybody? Another round of applause for Bridget,
Thank
and
you.
just a little something
That's
for
so
you.
sweet. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's
Thank
been
you.
amazing.
Thank you. I
wonderful.
appreciate it. I wish I had more time. There's so much to talk about.
imagine.
Okay. Thank
Okay,
you.
Thanks, everybody, for coming. Hope to see you next month. Have a good week. Okay?